Yo, what's going on, everybody? This is Nothing But Bangers, aka MBB, aka Bangers, aka I've got some brand new cooks that I want to share with you. Even though we haven't seen all the new cards yet, we're just kind of getting the ball rolling on how we think these cards may get optimized. And at the end, I've got a little bit of that's a pretty big update, honestly, in terms of what you'll be seeing with the channel. So definitely stay tuned to that if you want to know what's going on, or if you want to kind of get an idea of why some of these uploads have not been as frequent the past couple of weeks. But without further ado, let's get in the kitchen and show you what I've been cooking. The first deck that I wanted to talk about is the big cover card. It's the card that a lot of people are kind of split. I've seen some top players really high on this card. Personally, I'm a little bit hesitant for a lot of reasons, but just kind of giving you an idea of what the deck kind of looks like. Let's go ahead and kind of go back and just talk about the deck first. So first of all, a couple of Buzzwoles, a couple of Celestillas, one Kartana, two Pheromosas, two Cyrus, two Erica, two Leaf Cape. You've got two Lucamine, two Pokeball, two Research, and then one Red. So no disruption. However, I do think that you can play around with this a lot. I think that we're still completely unsure with, will it be additional cards that you want to play over some of the cards that you see in the list. For example, we definitely recognize that Pheromosa and Cyrus is just great synergy, and that's a good way to make your opponent bring in Pokemon that they maybe were trying to power up or trying to save for rare candy early, and just kind of hit them before they really get going. Then when you take a look at a card like Kartana, it's a basically grass Farfetch'd, and that card just may not even make the list. Another big thing that people will look at is double Celesteela, and they'll probably maybe cut it down to one. Let me push back on some of the different things on this list. So first of all, double Celesteela is because I almost always want to have the card, right? Like there's almost just never a scenario where I'm like, I don't want Celesteela. Like I almost always want at least one on my bench. And if I have two on my bench, I can pivot twice. So Buzzwole can get out of the active and then back into the active, assuming I have, multiple Ultra Beasts, which all the Pokemon are Ultra Beasts. So, but again, like you want to try to minimize the downside of Buzzwole's big beat attack, where it's 3 energy 120, but it can't use big beat the next turn unless you retreat it out, or at least it gets Sabrina or Cyrus or something. But benching it will go ahead and reset that. So that's why you kind of have that synergy with like double Celesteela. The right answer may be just playing one Sky Shaman, or maybe one Sky Shaman and one Healing Shaman. There's a lot of ways that you can go about it. Double Celesteela is just my first take on it without even playing the cards. Now, Lucamine is also another card that as soon as a Pokemon gets knocked out, it's pretty live. And, it gives you an opportunity, even if it only accelerates one energy, that one energy may be enough for you to go ahead and use Big Beat, right? And that's what's kind of massive about that. Now, you're probably not wanting to attack with Celesteela very often, but just because it's a coin flip for 100 damage. And if it rolls tails, it just doesn't do anything. However, it can take a hit, and it's only a one prizer. So that's also kind of nice. You won't get any use of Leaf Cape with Celesteela, so that's kind of a downside. But again, it's kind of like a last-ditch effort if you need to attack with it to try to maybe finish something off because maybe it's out of range. The rest of the list is pretty self-explanatory. I think Erica does a great job of healing and extending the life of your Pokemon, and Red just kind of helps you reach some of those breakpoints. Now, as we shuffle some hands, you guys can kind of see like Pheromosa, Celesteela, Pokeball in the opener, Research. So we'll go ahead and draw and kind of see what the rest of the hand looks like. So you got Pheromosa, you got Kartana, you got Red, obviously Lucamine. You're looking for Buzzwole. But again, just kind of shuffling through some of these hands and kind of letting you evaluate this. And I think it's so important to shuffle hands just to kind of see what the deck kind of feels like before we're able to actually play it. Especially if you're maybe on a budget with like trying to figure out if you want to craft something when you start opening packs and like your pack points are really valuable. Maybe it's good to kind of put your deck idea into PokemonMeta.com and then kind of shuffle around with it. Obviously, watching a streamer play it helps a lot as well. But again, you can see like this deck is going to be very aggressive, right? It's going to be able to start putting a lot of tempo on the board very quickly. And even those hands that you start with Celesteela, you're going to be able to get it out of the active. And like that's massive, right? But again, I do think that this deck has some big weaknesses. So let's talk about that for a second. Obviously Charizard, right? Obviously Charizard and Incineroar. Let's just like knock that out of the back. Okay, we don't need to talk about that. We know it is, it's a weakness, right? But let's kind of dig a little bit deeper. What about Meowscarada? You know, Meowscarada kind of puts this deck in a little bit of a weird scenario as well, because Meowscarada is a one prizer that can really put a lot of pressure on Buzzwole. And, you know, although the Buzzwole deck should be fast enough to really start chipping damage and potentially KO the Meowscarada before it gets going, like that's massive. But, you know, you're basically, in my opinion, kind of racing, right? You're basically racing and saying, hey, I'm going to be able to beat you down, right, before you can rare candy and really take momentum in the game, or just like evolve on curve. And like that's kind of a little bit of a gamble. Some people will be fine taking that gamble, but again, you know, just from my perspective, like I think this deck has similar issues to what like Solgaleo has, right? Or Solgaleo. And Solgaleo, like, it's a very powerful card, right? But it has the same, like, weakness, obviously fire, but it also, in my opinion, like, has the issue with, like, Meowscarada, right? And also, you know, when you take a look at the typing is very different, right? Like, with Buzzwole, it's a grass type versus Solgaleo, which is metal. And then, obviously, Skarmory is very good early aggression, but you know, it's also kind of like dependent on like what the matchup is. Can they out heal your damage and so on? So like I see a lot of like similarities in like the two kind of like ideas behind those decks. And obviously when you take a look at Buzzwole in general, I think it's a lot of combos. I think it's like combinations of like, you know, 2 to 5 cards, right? Whereas if I'm playing rare candy, it's like a basic rare candy in the stage 2, right? And then I'm just cooking. So like that's kind of one of the things that I look at as kind of like being a little bit like nerve-wracking, especially when you see that like this deck doesn't have a lot of room to play stuff like Disruption. So again, even though the deck does have like some really cool early aggression, and like obviously Buzzwole can put a lot of pressure early if you're able to go ahead and, you know, get the energies on it via Lusamine, or just like, you know, you have your Pokemon in the front dealing damage and you're slowly powering up the Buzzwole. Like, there's a lot of different things that can come into play here. But again, I'm not sure that this deck is going to be, you know, as is. Like, we may see more cards as well that kind of change this deck. But just like as is, I'm not sure that it's even like, I'm not sure that it really does enough to like do very much in the meta. I don't think it's like tier 1 just yet, but I think it's like a very good aggressive answer. And like depending on how the shape of the meta is, it may be able to like get some really good tournament meta calls. You know, think about this past weekend's 10K with Ursi's tournament. Meowscarada was like a great call, right? And if we had a deck like this in the 10K, I think this deck would have done fantastic. I think this deck would have maybe even won the entire event. But now look at how Meowscarada is performing, considering like the meta has kind of like adapted to it. So again, like I think it's going to be more of a meta call deck and just kind of like one of those really aggressive decks that Grass has a lot of tools that it can use. But again, I'm not super sold on it, even though I know there's a lot of people that are very high on it. Let's move to another grass deck. This grass deck is going to be Meowscarada with the inclusion of Pheromosa, and it's going to play double Cyrus to take advantage of that Pheromosa. You've also got the double Leaf Cape, the double Erica. In this list, I did play Florgato because I just kind of wanted to make sure that I can always evolve to Meowscarada, and it's a pure one prize deck, even though you are playing double rare candy with that Florgato. And then you've got one red to help finish and clean things up. But I like this deck a lot. It's just, again, like, you know, obviously Charizard is an issue, but again, like there are ways to win against Charizard in this matchup, right? The other thing that I like about this is it lines up very well into Darktina, in my opinion. And then you also think, I think it also lines up pretty well into a lot of the Ultra Beast decks, including something like maybe a Guzzlord deck. And so like that's very good, right? Now, the other things that I kind of notice about this deck is like there's people that are playing different variants of Meowscarada, like Decidueye and like, or Decidueye, and honestly Decidueye may just be better with the Pheromosa. You know, obviously we haven't played these cards yet, so it's impossible to know right now. But again, just kind of like shuffling through the hands and kind of getting a feel for the deck, you can see like yeah, there's going to be some hands where like you just rare candy on curve and you're like aggressive in the active and you're just like beating your opponent down. And like it you know, anytime I think of like beatdown, I always go back to that really old Magic the Gathering, you know, article, right? Where somebody was like, "Who's the beatdown?" Right? And and when do you recognize who's the beatdown in the matchup? Right? Like sometimes your deck is really aggressive, but you have to like play a little bit passive because they opened up stronger than you. So they're the beatdown in the beginning of the game, but obviously throughout the span of the game that can change. But just kind of like recognizing like when to be aggro, when not to be aggro. And I think in a lot of matchups with Meowscarada in general, you're going to want to be aggro. The issue that you're going to run into again is just like, you know, decks that, you know, are one prize decks that Meowscarada just doesn't have a very high damage cap, right? You know, Meowscarada is going to be dealing 60 damage sometimes. You know, Pheromosa is only going to deal 20 and 20 to the bench. So like your damage cap is very low. And that might be an issue, even though you do have heals and the leaf capes. So there are some weaknesses with this deck, but like I do think like day one, I would definitely like think of like if I'm looking for a one prize deck, Grass might be one of the really good one prize decks with Meowscarada and Pheromosa. Another one prize deck that's kind of got a little bit of a what I would call kind of a maybe a side grade is going to be Magnezone Oricorio. So there's going to be a couple ways that you can play Magnezone and Oricorio. In my opinion, playing something like Tapu Koko EX opens you up to maybe more of a weakness into maybe other decks like Meowscarada, or maybe some of the other fighting decks that can find a way to catch your Tapu Koko, knock it out for 2 points, and now you're really cutting it close because one more knockout, you lose the game. So this deck may not be the way to go, but it's just a way to cook with this new card. And I know that there's like not a ton of new cards in this deck, but basically you're playing Magnezone, Oricorio, and Tapu Koko. If you open Tapu Koko going second, you can really put a lot of aggression on your opponent. It's kind of like a side grade / upgrade to Pikachu EX. Then when you also take a look at the rest of the Pokemon, you got Oricorio that can also wall some of these EX only decks or decks that only play like maybe one other Pokemon that can attack that's not an EX. You've got Double Giant Cape, Mars, Pokemon Center Lady, Double Research, 1 Pokecoms, and then 1 Cyrus. So this is like very similar to the Magnezone Oricorio decks, except right now that are out right now, except you're swapping in the Tapu Koko. The big question is like, is it worth it, right? Is the early aggression with Tapu Koko going to be worth giving up a potential game where they're able to find a way to put 20 damage on your Tapu Koko and then Cyrus it out and then knock it out with something like a Meowscarada? That's going to be a little nerve-wracking, right? And you do play a hill and you do play giant capes, but you still wonder, like, is that going to be something that they're going to be able to counter and take advantage of? So when you take a look at some of these test hands, again, like the games that you open up with Magneton, able to evolve on curve, or the games that you open up with Oricorio and Tapu Koko, like pretty solid hands, right? Any time that I open with Tapu Koko going second, I'm probably going to be pretty happy about that. And, you know, that's one of the cool advantages of this deck. Now, when you take a look at some of the other hands, again, like there's no switch cards in here. So, you know, that may be something that can be addressed. You know, maybe the answer is just playing a deck with nothing but basics and then going ahead and playing something like the Sky Retreat Shaman and just cutting Magnezone altogether. I'm not sure that that's the way to go because Magnezone is like a very good card. Like it's just very playable and it beats a lot of good decks because it's a good value for one prize. So again, I think this deck definitely could be a deck that I want to play around with at the midnight release if I'm up and awake and streaming, you know. But again, like Tapu Koko, a really cool little kind of like addition to the electric family, and some people will be quick to compare it to something like Pachirisu, and I just think that that's misguided. I think that Pachirisu is noticeably weaker, and even though like it's a one prize versus a two prize, I think the addition of like the extra attack and also the ability to deal 20 damage compared to 10 with the 1 energy ramping attack is a very big deal. So personally, again, I think Tapu Koko EX, pretty good card, but again, I'm just not so sure, you know, looking at the meta and seeing if there's Meowscarada out there, that there's like a great chance that this card is able to actually thrive. Kind of reminds me of like the fact that we've had really good counters to electric types for like the past like 3 sets ever since Rampardos came out. Let's just say that you wanted to keep it pure one prizers with your Magnezone Oricorio list. Well, let's introduce Zeraora. If you're going first, you're going to love seeing Zeraora on your bench or in your active, because you're going to be able to put an energy on it from your energy zone, right? So basically, at the end of your first turn, take a lightning energy from your energy zone and attach it to this Pokemon, but that's only on your first turn, right? So there's the potential that, you go ahead and have, a Magna's, something else in the active, but you're able to find Zeraora and put it down on your bench. If it's your first turn, you're still going to be able to put an energy on it, right? So like, that's really cool. It also gives you the option to maybe power up an Oricorio in the active and then put the energy at the end of your first turn on Zeraora. So now you kind of have like 2 threats that can potentially pivot in, or get you some early tempo. It's 90 HP, so it's decent bulk, not great bulk. Then it's only got 1 retreat, so that's kind of really flexible as well. But this is basically giving you more options to potentially be more aggressive in the early game compared to maybe some of the other decks that we've seen with Oricorio and Magnezone that maybe don't attack until the second turn that they can attach an energy. Now, granted, you're still going to be doing that here, but you're going to get a little bit of an earlier advantage or an earlier race to that attack, right? Potentially, especially if you go first and you open Zeraora. The rest of the deck is almost a carbon copy of what we see played in the current Magnezone Oricorio list. You've got Double Giant Cape, you've got Guzma, you got Mars, you got Pokemon Center Lady and Cyrus, and then the obvious Professor's Research and Pokeball. This deck is going to be really, really fun to cook with. And at the end of the day, Zeraora or Tapu Koko, they may not be better upgrades than what the deck is currently playing, but it's at least an option that you can kind of try out. Now, again, looking at some of the weaknesses of this deck, like, dude, if you don't draw Magneton, you're going to hate this deck, right? Like, that's one big gripe that I have about, like, playing Magnezone is, like, dude, for whatever reason, I have the hardest time drawing Magneton, right? Like, even in these hands that you've seen me shuffle and kind of play around with, like, this is the first hand I've drawn Magneton in the game. Like, and obviously this is nothing connected to my Pokemon account, right? So again, like, for whatever reason, that's a big drawback. But again, the games that you go first and open up Zeraora, you're going to be able to put some pretty early pressure on your opponent potentially. And like, that's kind of nice, right? But again, the games that you don't find Magneton, the games that you go into that fighting weakness like a Rampardos and they just open the nuts, like, you're going to have a lot of difficulty. But I think that as far as like a one prize list goes, I think that the grass deck and, whatever version you want to play with Meowscarada, and I think that this deck still is going to be very strong going into the new set, even though we haven't seen the rest of the set. And obviously things could change. Things could be way different. The decks could be way different, but these are just some early ideas of how we could cook with some of these new cards. And again, I try to do this every set. Sometimes I do it live stream. Sometimes I do a recorded video like this. So this is Guzzlord. And this is kind of like my take on Guzzlord. Honestly, Guzzlord is really awkward because I'm not really sure what to pair with it. So I paired Darkrai, and then for a one prize attacker to not get completely walled by Oricorio, I put in Nihilego. Now, there's a big tech that's been going around. Shout out to Dai, one of the Italian players that's on the pocket shelves. He couldn't keep his mouth shut. He had to expose the rest of the game to the technology of playing Kamala, and Kamala has been all over the place in these Dark Tina decks since then. Now, Nihilego is kind of like a side grade, potentially, to the Kamala decks. And honestly, like, if you're playing Nihilego, you might make the argument that the Giant Capes should be Poison Barbs, or that you should be playing Poison Barb in this deck over something like a Potion, for example, right? Because it still may be very beneficial to play Giant Cape on something like a Darkrai to keep it out of range of things like Giratinas. It's not going to keep it out of range of things like Meowscarada, but it can kind of maybe save Darkrai from being one shot in some scenarios. So maybe the answer is cut Potion and add the Poison Barbs. That's something that you can kind of decide on. Some people don't love Red Card and Mars, but basically you're looking at Dark Tina, but instead of Giratina, which is one of the best Pokemon in the game, right? It's arguably the best single Pokemon card in the game, right? As far as Pokemon. And you're cutting that for Guzzlord, and you're getting Lusamine interactions, right? So like, say they knock out your Nihilego, well, now Lusamine is live and your Guzzlord can hopefully get the ball rolling. Say they knock out Darkrai, well, hopefully you're able to Lusamine, get those energy from the discard pile, put it on Guzzlord, and start going to town with your 170 HP basic Guzzlord. The thing that I kind of like get nervous about when I talk about like Guzzlord in general is Meowscarada, right? So like, again, that's kind of why I've been pretty adamant that I think Meowscarada is still going to be decent coming into the next meta, right, with a new set, because there's just so many things that grass is kind of like good against, right? And on top of grass being the weakness, it's also like a 1 prize deck versus a 2 prize deck. So I think that like that's really important to kind of pay attention to. But the rest of the deck, pretty straightforward. And you know, the game plan with this deck is going to be, you know, hey, maybe you're poisoning, they're active, and then you're kind of powering up, you know, your Guzzlord or your Darkrai. You know, starting Guzzlord is going to be horrible, right? Like, that's the one thing that I look at when I see this list, and I'm like, dude, there's really like, there's no Silastilla, so you can't get out of the active. So the correct way to play Guzzlord might end up being Silastilla, just so you can get it out of the active, but you're still going to need like an attacker that pairs well with Guzzlord. And like, the problem is like, the only other Ultra Beast is going to be Naganadel, right? So like, maybe you play Naganadel, Guzzlord, and Silastilla with Lusamine. Again, like it's really hard to cook with this card right now. And on Pokemon meta, they don't have Poipole as a Pokemon that you can add to your deck yet, so I just kind of didn't include Naganadel. But again, like, if you're wanting other ways to cook with this, like, look at this hand. You're opening Guzzlord, you have no other basics. If you go first, you're just so slow, right? You're just tremendously slow, and honestly, you're probably losing that game. So that's why this deck probably isn't going to work. And you're probably going to have to go back to the drawing board, right? You're probably going to have to cut some of these cards, add in Naganadel, add in Poipole, add in Silastilla, maybe cut some of the other Pokemon in this deck, maybe cut some of the trainers in this deck, and just completely revamp this deck. That would probably be the way that I would go about Guzzlord. But again, like, yeah, it's just so hard to tell because, again, we don't know what other cards they may be adding to kind of help Ultra Beast out as well. When you take a look at this deck, this is going to be a take on Weezing, which is a poisoner, with Nihilego, which is a poisoner, with Poison Barb, which is poison, with Darkrai. The best way to build this deck might be just pure 1-prizers, right? And you'll also notice there's no Lusamine in this deck because simply there's not enough Ultra Beast to really take advantage of it. There are some interesting card interactions with Darkrai that can really boost this deck, right? So like, Darkrai attaching energy is going to hit for 20, and then you potentially have a Nihilego on your bench, right, to deal extra poison damage, and suddenly your Weezing is dealing 30 plus 20 plus 20 for the poison, right? Like, that's like 80 damage pretty quickly, right? So it's a very interesting deck. It kind of gives me a little bit of vibes of like Weavile in a way, kinda, but this is going to be status effects, and like, if Silastilla is really as good as people are like, you know, anticipating with Buzzwole, then Poison's not going to matter, and Poison's just not going to be very good, right? Because you've got Arceus, you've got Pokemon Center Lady, and you've got Silastilla, right? So like, those are 3 things that like deal with Poison very well and pretty optimally, right? And on top of that, you've got the weakness to grass types with your Darkrai, but if you play this version as opposed to like a Naganadel version, you have a weakness to fighting. So that kind of like balances it out in some ways, and you know, we'll see. But the rest of the deck, you've got the double Weezing, you've got the double Darkrai, you've got double Nihilego, you've got double Koga, 1 Cyrus, double Leaf, double Poison Barb, and then 1 Red to help try to fix damage. I think that this deck is like really cool, but again, like, I just worry that if Silastilla in Buzzwole is any good, right? Like, if it's even like played at a high rate, it makes Poison just so much worse, right? And like, again, with cards like Arceus, with cards like Pokemon Center Lady, like, it also kind of makes Poison just like not as good. And so like, that kind of stuff worries me. But again, I do like the versatility of this deck. The deck just looks fun to play, and like, some people value that more than anything, right? Like, if I can have fun playing a status effect deck for the first time really in Pokemon Pocket where it's actually competitive, a lot of people are going to enjoy that. And to be fair, I think if we had to choose like the best status condition deck so far, this new Poison archetype is probably it, right? It's probably it. Now, whether or not you want to play it full 1-prizers or like with Darkrai is going to be completely up to you. I've even seen some top players and heard about top players cooking basically this deck, but instead of, you know, maybe including some of the trainer cards, they're playing Magnezone, right? So there's different ways to cook with this. And again, I do think that it's a deck that's worth at least trying out you know, just to have a little bit of a different flavor, especially if you're not able to pull a ton of EXs and you're only able to pull, you know, a couple Nihilegos. The other way that I mentioned building this deck is with Magnezone, and this is just a pure one prize deck, right? And instead of Darkrai, basically you're playing Magnezone, you're still playing double Nihilego, you're still playing double Weezing, you got one Koga, one Cyrus, double Barb, double Pokeball, double Research. The other way that you could maybe approach building this deck is going to be just swapping out the Koga engine and putting in Naganadel, and you get one more room for a trainer card, right? It could be a Mars, it could be a red card. Honestly, up to you, right? But that just kind of gives you a little bit more versatility. The reason why I like Weezing is because it can soak damage in a lot of matchups and then just Koga back up and make your opponent just kind of like back to square one, right? And I love that. And it also gives you flexibility to get out of the active after poisoning and then bring in Magnezone. So I really like this deck on paper. And unlike the Darkrai deck, the Darkrai Poison deck, I think that this kind of gives you the opportunity to still play Poison, but still be pretty powerful as a 1-point deck, and that's massive. Like, even if my Poison is getting, neutralized because of Stilla, I still get to hit you with Poison damage, 10 to 20 points of damage, maybe even 30. And, you're still going to have that damage on your bench, even if you use Stilla. Right? So like, I kind of like this version a lot more, but again, it's just going to come down to, hey, are you able to find Magneton whenever you need it? Because you're going to need Magneton to be able to put pressure with Magnezone in combination with these poison damage stacks, right? That's massive, right? And again, this is just really cool to see like an archetype that really like hasn't seen a lot of success. Like the Alolan Muck it's awful. It's just bad, right? Like, I mean, there's so many reasons why it's bad, but it's just bad. And this kind of gives you a more manageable way to play Poison. And like, sure, you could play something like Clodsire, but again, like, then you have to dedicate spots to Leaf, because once Clodsire's in the active, like, it's basically never coming out. So, that one's a little bit trickier. You may want to pair the Alolan, or excuse me, you might want to play Clodsire with Naganadel and Leaf. That may be the best way to play that, because if you play the Weezing package, you're going to need room for Koga as well, even if it's just a one of. So again, I do think that like this deck is really spicy, and if I pull double Nihilego, I will definitely be trying out some of these poison decks, especially with Magnezone, because like, to me, I wouldn't mind seeing Meowscarada matchups, because like, really, there's nothing weak to Meowscarada in this entire deck. And then when you take a look at some of the other decks like Giratina Darkrai, I think I should be able to go toe-to-toe with them. Obviously, the big weakness is going to be something like a Charizard, right? Like, Charizard decks are just going to eat up a lot of these decks, and I don't really see that I have room for something like a Giant Cape to put on my Magnezone to make it even more thick to potentially survive a Charizard attack. So again, like, I think that this deck could be really cool, but again, like the weaknesses, like the obvious Rampardos, the obvious Charizard, I think those are still big problems. But again, who knows just how much of the meta those decks are going to take up, right? But again, very fun looking deck. I think that it's going to be fun to play around with, and if you pull Nihilego, I definitely think it's worth trying, unless we get more cards revealed that are better than some of the cards that we have in these decks. So coming down to the penultimate deck, I've got one more deck that I want to show you, and then I'll kind of give you a little bit of an update. I've seen some people trying to cook with Morelull and Shiinotic, and honestly, like, I don't know, right? Like, I just had to build a deck for this card just because, like, I wanted to cook with as many of these cards as I could to kind of give you guys some ideas, maybe get your brain going. But basically, the idea is you try to get Shiinotic out very early, right? And that way it's giving you that card advantage. It's giving you those Pokemon. And, like, there's some really cool synergy with Sprigatito and Shiinotic, right? So Shiinotic can be on your bench, and then Sprigatito can be thinning your deck of grass Pokemon, giving you a fuller hand, so that way you can combo off with stuff like Rare Candy. I have Greninja in this deck list as well to try to fix damage. And I haven't been talking about energies. By the way, I would probably try this deck with just nothing but grass energies at first. In some matchups, you may want the water energy, right? Like, some people in tournaments have been doing that. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but some decks, they quote unquote, to quote Toby, they turn the water on, right? And my mustache, but But basically they turn the water on, and what that means is like in some matchups they'll add water energies to their Pokemon, right, to their deck. And previous decks that I've been, showcasing, I think that, like the Magnezone deck with the Poison engine, I think you should play nothing but dark energies personally. But in decks like this, I think you could probably have the option, right, to maybe play, turn on the water in some matchups where maybe like fire is a thing, right? So there's some matchups where you're going to want those water energies potentially. But again, like this is just an early draft. I don't really think that Pokemon communication belongs in decks like this just because there's so many Pokemon that you can never really like narrow down what you're going to get. But again, like I think that if you're going to play Morlul, the best way to play this and play Shiinotic, the best way to play this is probably like high Pokemon counts and low trainer counts and just kind of like thin, and hopefully when you play a trainer, it's really impactful, right? But again, like I don't think that this deck is much more than a meme at this point. I think it's mostly just meme. I don't think that it's necessarily going to be like super good, but it's just like another cool deck that you can kind of play around with if you end up pulling, some Morluls and you kind of want to just like play Morlul, right? And Shiinotic, right? Excuse me, I keep saying Morlul. I should say Shiinotic, right? But anyways, so that's the deck. There's some test hands with it. And again, like, who knows? Some matchups you're going to want water energy in a tournament and some matchups you're not, right? All right. The last deck, and this card was like really hard to cook with. Honestly, I don't know that this is the best way to approach this, but I figured I might as well like try to cook with this. So I've got double Blacephalon. I've got the Infernape line with one Monferno, and then I've got double Turtonator. So I do play 2 Lusamine and then 2 Kiawe and then 1 Dawn. I also play double Rare Candy, double Research, double Pokeball. So the idea is if you start with Blacephalon, you're probably like letting it get knocked out. If you start with Turtonator, you probably want to try to hit a Kiawe, right? But again, like there's going to be some hands where the idea is Blacephalon, maybe it comes out early and like you probably just let it get KO'd and power up your bench, right? There's going to be some games where you want to put Turtonator out there and, Turtonator is able to resolve a Kiawe and then like kind of start applying pressure while you evolve into Infernape and hopefully make the transition into Infernape. The other thing is if you open with like Infernape Rare Candy, right? And you're able to attack pretty early with Infernape. Well, because of the free retreat, you can actually retreat the Infernape out of it, right? And then immediately pivot into something else like a Blacephalon or like a Turtonator and maybe resolve a Kiawe and kind of get back onto attacking, right? I don't know that this deck is going to work at all. In fact, it probably may be the worst deck on this outside of like maybe the Darkrai Guzzlord deck. But these are just early ideas. And realistically, like I think that Blacephalon is really hard to work with because like it's got that double retreat and also, like in order for a Lusamine to be good, something has to get knocked out, right? So like what's getting knocked out so early? You know what I mean? So I wonder if they're going to give a way to like turbocharge your fire Pokemon faster. Because obviously Kiawe does it for Turtonator, but outside of that, it's kind of lackluster. So that's kind of the idea behind the deck. And honestly, it just may be trash, right? It may actually be actual trash. Maybe you can put in a Pokecoms instead of a Dawn to try to find your rare candy combo earlier. But again, like, just trying to cook with some of these new cards, and some of these new cards are just a little bit hard to cook with the cards that we've seen revealed. So what was your favorite deck out of these? Let me know what decks are you potentially cooking with the cards that we know so far. And I didn't build anything with Ultra Necrozma, but like Ultra Necrozma is just like Giratina, Meltan, and Prey, right? Like, and Lunala, right? Like, it's just so combo heavy. But let me update you a little bit on like what's going on, and stay tuned for this if you want to kind of get an idea of where the channel is going. So I want to start off with like obviously acknowledging that I've done a terrible job uploading videos for the past like 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It's been very bad on my end, and part of the reason for that is I've been looking at a transition, and the transition that I want to make is probably more catered to that 8 to 5 work life. And
that obviously, kind of reinserting myself into kind of like the real world. And ever since 2020, when the whole thing went down that everybody around the world kind of knows, I basically made a career change, and that career change kind of like resulted in me being a lot more independent. And I've done, thousands of deliveries with like DoorDash, Uber Eats. I've done Airbnb. I've done independent contractor work the past couple of years, like just trying to be more independent and kind of get out of that, that quote unquote like rat race, right? And in between doing that, I decided to start a YouTube channel because I wanted to put myself out there and say, hey, I don't want to be 40, 50, 60 years old and look back and say, man, I should have started a YouTube channel. I don't know if it would have worked, but I should have started it, and I should have at least like tried my hardest to, maybe make a drastic change in my life for the foreseeable future with content creation. And so I really put myself out there, and like, if you have been with me since like the beginning days of my channel, I didn't even talk about Pokemon as much, right? Like I didn't play like trading card games on this platform, right? I talked about other stuff like digital collectibles, sports betting, and like I met a lot of people, and it's been a fantastic journey. And it's really given me a lot of light in different lights in different areas of my life. And at first I didn't even want to like show my face, right? Like I was just like petrified of like putting myself out there because, I don't want to freaking be a meme. I don't want to be, immortalized in internet meme history. Like, dude, that's not in any of my interests. Like, I don't want to be, recognized when I go to the store. I don't want any of that, right? Like, I just like making content and like, trying to help people with different things that I'm interested in. And that's why I didn't like show my face for like the first 2 years of my YouTube channel. And like people would always leave comments like, MBB, you should show your face. MBB, win face reveal. And I was always just like, dude, like that's not gonna really, like, in my eyes, more people weren't gonna click on my video if I, revealed who I was, with my face, for example. And then I got the idea. I was like, dude, why not just like create a character? Why not create a character and put him out there and be that character? So that way, like, hey, you have a little bit of a, this quirky mustache that is completely 100% real, that sometimes falls off in the middle of videos and I've got to like edit it out and stuff, and it kind of gives you a little bit more personification with me, right? And so like I started doing it, I put the MBB character out there, and that's me, right? But the honest truth is I've been at this for almost 5 years to the date. I've been at YouTube. And honestly, like, I'm never going to be able to do this full time. It's never going to be my full-time job. I'm just, quite frankly, I'm not good enough at it. And I can just say that I tried. I can say that I met a lot of cool people. I had some banger videos, and I'm still going to put videos out, right? Like, it's just not going to be very frequent, right? It's going to be maybe 1 to 2 a week. Some weeks I may not put out anything because I am hopefully going to be in a new kind of like, I've reinserted myself into the rat race, right? So, for example, I have work the morning of the set release that's coming up, right? And for every set so far, I've been awake at midnight and played for 6-7 hours, right? And I don't know that I can do that with this new set. And I'm going to be working that whole day. I'm going to come home, I'm going to need to cook dinner and like manage, obviously make sure like nothing in my house is like screwed up, right? And I don't know how I'm going to feel about like putting out videos and sitting there streaming, right? So I know that this is going to be different. And I also know that like it's not completely over. I just know that it's going to be different. And so every video I try to remind you guys that it means so much for you to let me be background noise, be entertainment, or maybe you learn something. And I mean that from my heart, because I know that this wasn't going to last forever. I had seen the analytics as much as I try to like not look at them and not look at the views. And I knew that like this would never be a thing that I could do full time. And to give you an idea, like I think the most I made on YouTube in a month was like $200 or $300, right? I hate talking about this, but like that's obviously not going to pay the mortgage, right? And so that's why I would do this other gig work, right? And you know, I've gone through a car. I've had to buy a new car. And now that car, And now that car is like 100,000+ miles. I've had to make repairs on my house, the air conditioner that I mentioned. And like, honestly, you know, this isn't sustainable for me to spend so much time in Discord and in different communities and like streaming for pennies on the hour, making videos for pennies on the hour. It's just not a good management of my time anymore. And so, although I'm going to be making, hopefully, a lot more money, it is definitely the end of a chapter that I've enjoyed thoroughly. And so, I want to leave this video and end this video and hopefully get a video out when the new set drops. Maybe I just like destroy myself and like stream the release anyways, and I still see you then. But I want to just tell everybody from any age. I'm 34 for those of you who don't know, and I've played trading cards since I was like 13, 12, 13. Fantastic time, and yeah, I mean, I've met so many people. I've gotten to travel so many places. I've loved Yu-Gi-Oh! I've loved Magic. I've loved Pokemon for this whole time. And, you know, I want to tell you guys this, for those of you that are still watching to the very end, because you have nothing better to do, or you're stuck with me, or you genuinely enjoy the content that I make for you guys. And I want to tell you this as a motivation. I don't think that you should live with what ifs. I think that we're on here, you know, on this planet for a very finite time. And no matter what you believe in, I think that when you're 18, when you're 20, when you're 25, when you're 30, when you're 35, when you're 40, I think it's important to always just say, let me just try this. Even if it doesn't work, let me try. And if I fail, if it doesn't work, at least I can say I tried. And that's what I want to live with. I want to milk and squeeze every bit out of this experience that we call life. And this was my way of doing it. And I hope that you guys can too. No matter your age, no matter what country you're in, no matter what your financial situation is, I hope that that's something that you can take away. You know, a lot of people have reached out about, MBB, I'm thinking about starting my own channel, and I've seen people do it, right? And the first thing I always tell them is, just do it. Just try. Your audience will tell you what you like. The analytics will tell you what you like. But just go try. And so that's how I end this video. I love you all very much for giving me the opportunity to be background noise, to be entertainment, or maybe you learned something. And until next time, peace.